What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. And today we're going to be discussing this purported soul trap, reincarnation cycle, infinite loop, or potentially infinite loop, unending loop, let's just say, that we may potentially be stuck in. And I'm going to share two perspectives on this. One, we're going to be going back to Jason Jorjani, somebody who I've recently become aware of, and somebody who seems very reputable in terms of the material that he cites, the analysis that he performs. And so I've become quite fond of a lot of his writings and interviews. And so we're going to talk about him because or talk about this whole idea from his perspective from a recent interview, because he always, I feel, does such a thorough job in explaining why he's saying what he's saying, who he's citing, remote viewers, research papers, books, and he seems to have an amazing recall. So we're going to start by building this potential framework from the words of Jason Jorjani. Then later on, we're going to transition to Darius J. Wright. Now, Darius J. Wright, I'm going to read his bio later on in the video, but he is I believe, an expert in out-of-body experiences, astral projections. And based on his numerous astral projections, he claims to have a deep knowledge and understanding of exactly how reality and the astral plane and life and afterlife and all of those things work. And he's been getting a lot of notoriety lately. Somebody mentioned him in the comments as somebody I should check out. And we're going to compare and contrast the two different perspectives presented from both of these guys. And we're going to talk about which one maybe resonates a bit more, which one or which perspective resonates for what particular reasons. Also, which one I hope is right, but may not think might be right, at least currently. So we're going to go through all of this stuff. So first of all, let's break it down. Let's talk about what Jason Jorjani believes. Who Jason Jorjani, if you're not familiar with him, he calls himself a philosopher, but this guy seems to just know everything from the entire history of Iran and all of the political dealings of that country to extraterrestrials to Epstein and the Epstein files, and ultimately to afterlife, near-death experiences, and ultimately what's going on this planet, which he believes is some sort of a loosh farm. So we're going to hear his entire narrative of everything that's going on in his words and what he believes is going on this planet, which is quite dismal, to be honest, if we believe this narrative. And then we're going to go transition to Darius J. Wright, because the two do intersect in some way. All right, let's start it off here. So first, he's talking about this idea of the Earth being a loosh farm. So if you missed some of my previous videos, he's going to explain right here exactly what that means. But loosh is a term that Robert Monroe coined via his many remote viewing and astral projection trips with his team at the Monroe Institute. And this is what he talks about in one of his books. This is what he discovered, is that the entire planet is basically a big battery, and the energy source is literally us. And it's our emotions. It's the energy that we give off via emotions, and that's being harvested. And in fact, it goes beyond just simply life. It goes into death, that our isbes, our souls, our essence is actually recaptured after we pass on and fed back into the system via reincarnation plus memory wipes, so that we just keep repeating these cycles of lives on Earth over and over while emitting this energy. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into the mix, and then we're going to jump through this narrative piece by piece. I've laid out all the videos kind of in this way, categorically. Check this out.
In particular, one of the most famous is an account that Robert Monroe, who founded the, Monroe Institute and so forth, that the CIA used to use sometimes as a place to conduct advanced remote viewing. Robert Monroe, in his second book, Far Journeys, I think from 1985, basically says that in the course of his astral projections, he discovered that we're living in a control system that is managed by entities who work for a demiurge that's harvesting us for what he called loosh.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, this notion of the word demiurge, it's interesting. I don't know if this word exactly is in Robert Monroe's book, because I haven't read it yet, but I will be reading it. That, mark my word. But it's funny if it's interesting. I shouldn't say funny. If that word demiurge is specifically in the text, that's very interesting, because that coincides with the Gnostic belief that the material world is, and I don't know when they mean the material world, the entire universe, or simply they're talking about Earth. I don't know, but the demiurge is the one that is responsible for manufacturing the physical world and then entrapping basically us, our spiritual essence, us as fragments of source into the system, and then keeping us trapped here. So it's just fascinating that these journeys out of the body or via remote viewing ultimately revealed this figure that's discussed in the Gnostic texts.
He said that we're in a loosh farm, that humans are being deliberately subjected to conditions that create extreme emotional states. Extreme suffering, misery, fear, terror, ecstasy, extreme desire, pathological impulses, and these are all being used to basically generate a form of energy that they can harvest from the human soul, including after death, where they basically juice souls for the loosh.
So this was super disturbing when I first heard about this. There's just so much to talk about here, because I, for a long time, when I was discovering near-death experiences, NDEs, felt, and I think as many people do, all the madness, all the craziness that is happening on Earth, at least once we move on from this life, then we're free, we're liberated, we see the truth, we understand reality. But it appears to be a much more dim picture that perhaps, according to Robert Monroe, and we're going to talk about Robert Monroe and remote viewing briefly, in case you're unfamiliar, in a moment, but what he's uncovered is that, in fact, no, the cycle continues and we're still trapped in the system. Even though we may not think we're in the system after we pass on, we're still in the system, and we're manipulated and convinced to stay in this system and stay in this loop even after death, which is wild. Now, you might be saying, if you're stumbling across this video, you never heard of remote viewing, never heard of Robert Monroe, you never heard of loosh, you're like, what in the hell is going on? This is just pure nonsense. Where's this coming from? What I would say to you is just do a little bit of research and try to understand what remote viewing is, because remote viewing, if you've never heard of it, it's actually in released CIA and declassified CIA documents. Remote viewing, the idea is basically, some people have this skill, but anybody theoretically can develop the skill to view things outside of their body in distinct locations, anywhere across the galaxy, theoretically, the universe theoretically, but also across time. So using these techniques and using a number of people to perform these techniques simultaneously, you can actually at some points get reasonable information about the workings of the universe or certain historical events. And they're usually not, again, as I mentioned, these expeditions usually aren't done by one person. They're usually done by a team of people, so that you can make sure that there's no misinformation being transmitted back, or there isn't something being lost in translation. So it's after the corroboration has been done that these results are reported. And this is something that Robert Monroe, and they were doing at the Monroe Institute for a long time. This is something that was happening there, and that's how this information was extracted. Like, it's science fiction. It's wild. It's so hard to believe. But if you dig a little bit deeper in terms of the methods, in terms of how they extracted this information, you'll start to understand that it's not just out of thin air. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next clip, where he talks more about this loosh farm. And the loosh farm, in order to keep the loosh farm going, all of us on this planet are essentially trapped in a control system that manages us while we're here on the planet, but also after we pass on.
In any case, Carla Turner did interviews with a lot of experiencers, abductees, who reported the same kinds of things as Robert Monroe did in Far Journeys, where they said that we are in a control system that's being managed from out of a metallic sphere just beyond the Earth. And they describe the inside of this thing.
What?
I think, going back to our first conversation, what they're describing is the inside of the moon. That there is what we might call, using the Soviet language, a psychotronic control system, a kind of spectral technology inside of the moon, which is impinging on and manipulating humans in the afterlife state.
What?
And it's not omnipotent.
Yeah.
It's not a flawless system. So it's possible to assert your free will and self-determination in the face of this system, but it's very difficult. So a lot of people have had near-death experiences, for example, they describe being pulled toward this light. It's like they couldn't resist going into the light.
Yeah.
They tried in some cases,
Yeah.
but it was almost as if it was an electromagnet, like pulling them into it.
Sure.
Okay. So this is the system. By the way, Jesse Michaels, I've just become aware of his podcast. He's incredible, such a great interviewer, and he's so intelligent. He understands a lot of the conversations that are happening at a very deep level, whether you're talking about spirituality, electromagnetism is wild. This guy is unbelievable. But there's a little bit of glimmer of hope. Now, first, let's talk about this whole idea of the psychotronic equipment in the moon. I'm not super familiar with this theory yet, so I just want to state that up front. But whatever, we go back to this idea that we are in some sort of a control system that was also corroborated outside of Robert Monroe's remote viewers from these other abductees that also saw the system from the outside. There's another team of remote viewers that we're going to go to in a moment that also corroborate the same narrative of being trapped in some sort of an electromagnetic grid or something like that, that keeps our souls or our energies within this system. But there's a little glimmer of hope that he mentioned. You notice that he said it's very difficult to get out of this control system, but it is not a flawless system, and there is ways to get out of it by asserting your free will and your what did he say, self guidance, whatever he said. But the main idea comes down to free will. So we're going to come back to that when we listen to Darius J. Wright. That's the glimmer of hope. That's the positivity. How we do that is another question. Not totally sure yet. I'm still trying to learn and understand all of this stuff. But within this framework, there is a possibility that you can escape the system and not be forever trapped. And of course, Darius J. Wright seems to know, or he has the answer, according to him. But anyways, okay. Now, how do we get convinced to return? How do we get right? Are we just thrown back into bodies? Well, if you read Michael Newton's book about Journey of Souls, even in those accounts, it's a decision. You have to agree. You have to say, yes, I want to go back. You usually are part of the choosing the life process, choosing your parents, choosing your family, choosing your struggles, choosing your gifts. And so it's a collaborative effort. And I think that seems to be a theme across the board, even for NDEs, that ultimately we aren't just forced into things. We must sign off for whatever reason. I don't know, maybe because ultimately we do have the power. Maybe ultimately free will is just that. We are absolutely free to accept things or reject things. We have that authority and we have that power. But in order for us to partake, we need to agree. We need to sign on the dotted line and say, okay, I want to do this. Yes. And according to Jorjani, how that consent is given, right? Because if it's a control system and we're being put into these unpleasant situations to generate energy, why wouldn't we just go out there and say no? Why wouldn't we put our foot down and say, absolutely not? I want to exit the system. Here's the answer. It is, according to Jason Jorjani, a manipulation, a system of manipulation that is set up to, you could say, guilt us, you could say convince us, however you want to put it, to saying, okay, you're right. I need to go back again. I want to go back again with these certain challenges because I think this will be good for me. Okay, so this is the system of manipulation via false figures.
One of the most common things that's described is that people are shown their dead relatives and religious authority figures like Jesus. And or like if you're a Hindu, you see Hindu gods, interestingly. I'll give you a terrifying case from a Hindu in a minute. So you're pulled into this light and then they show you your dead relatives and they show you Jesus and whatever. Well, here's the problem, Jesse, is that if you look at Dr. Ian Stevenson's extremely rigorous research on reincarnation that he did at the University of Virginia for decades on children's spontaneous memories of past lives, all the cases show that the average interval between death and reincarnation is something like, it could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years maximum. It's usually not more than several years. So when you are having a near-death experience and your grandmother, and let's say you're in your 60s in your 60s, and you see your grandmother who died when you were in your 20s, that's bullshit. You are being shown an artificially generated simulacrum of your dead relatives to manipulate you. by a psychotronic technology.
This is getting
by a
into.
psychotronic technology.
You really think that?
Yes, I do.
Really?
And I say that as someone who was, at the bedside, at the deathbed of a couple of my relatives who were experiencing these things. When people are very close to death, they also see dead relatives come around their hospital beds. Very commonly reported. And so one case was my great aunt, or I was there while she was like not describing to us, she was having conversations with dead relatives that, the other family members knew, oh, that's so-and-so, she's talking to so-and-so, as if he's like in the hospital room. And the most striking case was with my own grandmother, my Persian grandmother, to whom I owe the fact that I fluently speak Persian, because both of my parents worked when I was growing up, and they would leave me with her during the days, and she hardly spoke any English. So I learned like Persian practically as my first language in New York. So I was very close to my grandmother. And when she was dying, this exact thing happened. She starts talking to my dead grandfather. Now, my Persian grandfather died when my father was 4. Okay? That guy reincarnated 60, 70 years ago. So she's talking to something that's being projected into our mind psychotronically.
But how do you know it's being projected psychotronically and it's not just a function of her own old age and
sure. I mean, that's the conventional skeptical response. I would say, based on what Robert Monroe described in terms of the terrain of the afterlife through his astral projections, which then other people at the Monroe Institute were able to replicate, and based on the kinds of accounts that, let's say, Carla Turner got from abductees of being taken to places that were not just like, like space alien bases. There were places where the soul was being handled as some kind of an informational matrix and or energy source.
Wild. Right. Wild. We have, so again, and I think that's really good that Jesse Michaels is pushing back and saying, well, obviously, and I think that would probably be, of course, the conventional narrative for the vast majority of people that are hearing this, who haven't really explored any of this information, might be hearing it for the first time. Like, what are you talking about, dude? They're just hallucinating. This is just made up figments of their imagination. However, another thing that I think it's very interesting that he mentions all of these other sources that corroborate this idea that it is perhaps these projections. He calls them psychotronic projections or whatnot. But there's another source that he doesn't cite here, which is also all of the NDEs, all of the near-death experiences where people are out of their bodies for a period of time. There's no brain activity, and they report the same thing. They report seeing relatives that had passed on a long time ago. They also report seeing religious figures. A lot of people report seeing Jesus. There's people report seeing Buddha, report seeing Hindu gods, etc. So even in these NDEs, it's the same thing where you're seeing either religious figures or these relatives. And so that meshes, that mixes well with the same accounts that you're seeing with people passed on. And then that interesting tidbit about the period of time in the lives between lives, if you will, in the time in the astral before you reincarnate again. That's a fascinating little nugget that I have heard him say this in another interview, but I haven't read about this yet. I don't believe that was in Journey of Souls, if I'm not mistaken. So that's fascinating. And that does call into question a lot of what people are reporting, maybe not on the religious figure side, but more on the relatives or seeing loved ones that had passed on 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That's fascinating. But anyways, the point is, this goes back to the idea of free will, that they need, or the system needs, us to agree and to sign on the dotted line. Now, it could be that it doesn't need that. Maybe we could be forced back, but it's better for the system. It's better for this loosh farm if we do agree. We become, perhaps because we buy in, we are better sources of fuel. I don't know. It may not be that we actually truly have the ability to escape. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. And it's just a way to keep things better. You might imagine if we have a cattle farm or chicken coop, and it's better for the food supply for the chickens to be happy and free range than to be confined and miserable. And therefore, you might say, yes, we therefore are trying to, the chickens are basically, there's a chance for them to be liberated because they're being treated well. But it's not that. It's just, it provides a better product at the end. Maybe it's the same thing. If we sign off, we're a better product. We produce better results. I don't know. Or it could be the free will thing. I'm not exactly sure. But anyways, whatever it may be, this mechanism by which they get us to sign on the dotted line and agree wholeheartedly via free will to come back into the system is all pushed by these manipulations via false religious figure projections or relative projections, etc. So this is the framework that Jorjani is describing. Now, again, more corroboration comes from another remote viewing group, independent remote viewing group, not from Robert Monroe's team. And a gentleman's name is Stewart, I believe is his last name. I did a video on this guy already. Crazy story of what he recounts in terms of what his team of remote viewers viewed and observed when they were remote viewing the word moksha, which means liberation. And they were trying to basically, all four of them, trying to figure out what happens to souls, or the isbi is another word for soul, what happens to it after it passes on. Does it achieve moksha? Does it achieve liberation? And what they found is pretty crazy. So this is another independent a source of information via remote viewing that corroborates this narrative that Jason Jorjani is putting forth.
Who did a remote viewing on the word moksha. Moksha. So what was in the envelope was moksha, the target they were blind to. Moksha means liberation in Sanskrit.
That's how remote viewing works, by the way. They're just given an envelope with a target. So they're not given any additional information of what they're looking at because they don't want that information to cloud what they end up perceiving. Or so they're just given a word, independent people, and then they go into this remote viewing zone. I don't know exactly how it works. And then if they all kind of come around and they see and describe roughly the same thing, that they know, okay, we're all on the right target and we can rely on the results and the information extracted.
It's great. It's like how you get out of the wheel of samsara. And so he does this session with his team. And long story short, he comes back with this horrific account that all of them do. Of course, they're all working the same target, blind to the same target, and they're all doing this independently. And then they compare notes. And they said that you can't achieve moksha. Because as you try to escape the earth, there's something that grabs you and bends you back toward the earth. Like if you're a ray of light, it's like it bends the light that's your soul back toward the earth, like a what do you call them? A lensing effect. And he said it's originating from some celestial body near the earth, and that it is part of a vast machinery of energy extraction, which was set up in our solar system at the end of a war that devastated the solar system. He said that like millions of years ago, there were these horrendous people who wanted to establish this energy harvesting system here and wanted to exploit humanity for this purpose. And there was a rebellion against them, and the conflict was waged across the entire solar system.
Crazy. But again, you know, these guys, I think Robert Monroe, they didn't talk about this war, at least not that I'm aware of. I haven't read the book, so I don't know the full details. But this is an added detail. But the interesting bit, the most important bit, in my opinion, is that overlap. The overlap of this grid system, or this system that is capturing our essence after we pass on and redirecting us back in. Now, that entire remote viewing account, if you watch my video on that whole remote viewing testimony, it's wild. They describe in so much detail this system and how the energy is extracted, how the souls are like fragmented slightly through this energy extraction system. And then they are also able to remote view the entities that are behind this entire system, and they managed to be like, it's wild, dude. It's wild. They managed to encase themselves in some sort of like black hole realm where time is slowed down to the point where it's just frozen. So essentially these entities, which they said are biological entities, are for all intents and purposes immortal. But to power their entire system and give them energy, they have these different systems all throughout the universe around different planets where they have the same loosh farming operation going on. It's so wild. But coming back to this, the soul energy leaves and it's bent backwards by whatever this magnetic force is, and we're unable to leave. Again, a scary proposition, terrifying proposition, as Jorjani himself points out. Maybe free will is a mechanism by which to escape, maybe not totally sure. But this is Jorjani's position for the most part. Now here, Jesse Michael said, dude, this is dismal, man. This is depressing. So what do you believe in in a God that can actually save us? And it's interesting the way Jorjani responds, because he doesn't say yes. So I don't know. Maybe he doesn't, and that's a bummer, because at least up to this point, I'm still trying to figure out everything, but I've kind of come to the conclusion that yes, there is a God or source. It's got to be the source of all of us, and maybe we're all fragments of him, and ultimately this source is out there, and that would be the highest power in all of existence. Not in the traditional religious sense of like Islam or Judaism or Christianity or something, not like that per se, but there is an ultimate source. And Jason Jorjani kind of shrugs that off. It's a little bit of a bummer. Was hoping he wouldn't go that route. But anyways, what he does say is, I don't believe necessarily in God. I believe in Prometheus. And we're going to see what he means by that right now.
That's so depressing. I mean, is there any aspirational streak within that? Do you believe in God? Do you think
I believe in Prometheus.
Okay.
In other words, the reason that Prometheus has become such a central archetype to my philosophical project is because if you look at the structure of this myth, it encompasses all the major elements of most religious belief systems, but in a way that's empowering to humanity.
So what is he saying there? What is the myth of Prometheus? The myth of Prometheus, he takes fire from the gods and delivers it to the people and then empowers the people. I think what he's saying is, while maybe he doesn't, and of course, this is just one man's perspective, right? It doesn't mean that, okay, then we got to give up all hope, and maybe this source or this God that we envision being out there that ultimately has domain over everything, we don't have to say that it doesn't exist. But regardless, what he is saying here is, I think, where he holds his faith in the idea that somebody, either part of this force that's managing us or entrapping us, or somebody here, or some combination thereof, it's theoretically possible that we could leverage the technology or utilize the knowledge or something along those lines that is held by these entities that are running the control system, extract it, share it, and I assume this is what he believes that would be the means to liberation for all of us that are theoretically trapped in the system. This is what I'm gathering when he says, hey, I believe in Prometheus. I think this is what he's aiming to achieve or pull off, if this is his objective and this is his goal. By the way, I just bought his book, Thenosis, so once I read that, I probably will have a much better idea of how he views this entire paradigm and what he thinks is the way to ultimately escape. But there it is in a nutshell, Jorjani's presentation of this system that he thinks we're trapped in. Maybe a way to get out via free will, maybe other ways, I'm not exactly sure, but that's in a nutshell. Now we move on to Darius J. Wright. So who's Darius J. Wright? He's a spiritual teacher and content creator who publicly described himself as an out-of-body experience explorer focused on consciousness, the other side, and the nature of reality. On his official site, he says he had conscious out-of-body experiences since childhood and now teaches methods for others to explore similar states, including his AYDA method. I don't know what that is. I haven't checked that out yet. I'm still new to Darius J. Wright. It's funny. Some of his videos have randomly popped up for me on different occasions, but I've never really dove in and watched any of his content in detail. I will plan to do that, but it is important to note that I did come across today when I was doing research on him that there's a fair amount of people out there that, I guess, for lack of a better word, they think he's a fraud, I guess. Or some people even said they think he's working with the archons, right? In the Gnostic tradition, the archons are the ones that are managing the system. If we blend the Gnostic view with what these people, remote viewers, are saying is going on this planet, the archons are the one managing the system. So they believe he's an agent of the archons. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just telling you guys what I saw that is out there. So we're going to take what he's saying with that little tiny grain of salt, as I think it's worthwhile to mention. But regardless, Darius J. Wright, from what I've gathered so far, provides a very uplifting view in terms of, are we trapped? Are we not? Because ultimately, I think his main thesis is that we are what we think we are, which also meshes with a lot of things that William Bullman talks about. Our consciousness and the way we direct it is the way things will manifest in this life to an extent, but 100% in the astral. That your thoughts direct you're seeing, etc. So it's really that I would say this is kind of at the heart of what Darius J. Wright is positing with respect to this question. So we're going to get into some of the statements on this idea of, is there a soul trap? Is there a system that we're trapped inside of? This is from an interview. So listen to his response right here. Is this the case? Now we're going to hear from Darius J. Wright.
A lot of traditions, Native American traditions and other indigenous traditions, warn people of this light tunnel or this false light as being a trap, as being something deceptive. Why are they warning them, and is there any truth to that?
I've never experienced that myself, personally. So the closer you get to the source of things, the bigger the shadow is going to become. So the closer you get to the light of things, the bigger the shadow is going to become. That's just revealing truth. But I wouldn't even fear the tunnel of light itself. Yeah, because then again, the moment you leave your body, nothing can touch you. So if you fear light to touch you, that tunnel to touch you, then therefore you will be temporarily touched and create a temporary imprisonment for yourself. But I'm going to say no to that, because I haven't directly experienced it, and based off everything that I've accessed, there's never been that.
Okay.
So yeah.
There are a number of questions specifically to out-of-body experiences. I know that is something that you teach.
Should I say this as well?
Sure. Anything.
Just like a lot of the Native American, that section, just like religion, a lot of information has been infiltrated even within their community to implant fear constantly. So I'll leave it there.
See, so first of all, that's beautiful if that is true, and I want to believe that ultimately, if you're going to have some fear in your mind of the light trapping, and then the light will trap you. Which the positive thing to extract from that is, it's all, the control is all up to us. It's up to our free will. So we ultimately have control. Therefore, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, is one way to put it. And I want to believe that positive narrative. But the problem I have with the statements that he puts forth there, is he said, what do you make of these ideas from native cultures? And he says, yeah, I've never seen it. Therefore, I've never experienced it. Therefore, I'm going to say no. There is no such thing as a soul trapper. There's nothing to fear in terms of the lights, and there's nothing that can entrap us. Well, but it's weird to say just definitively no. What about, hey, perhaps? I only say this because what about all these accounts that we're hearing? What about all these testimonies from these remote viewers and these people who are also doing astral projections, which is exactly what this gentleman, Darius J. Wright, is saying, where he's getting all of his information. So why is he able to share all the information that he's gathering and then dismiss these other accounts? Or at least I would love for him to say, let me tell you what's going on in these other accounts when they're experiencing that. They are manifesting this experience by virtue of their own fear, by things that they're being told. That's where it's coming from. Like, I want to hear that explanation, as opposed to, no, I just think there's nothing to it because I've never experienced it, right? That feels a little funny. Nevertheless, that can be a topic of discussion for another day. But his main thesis, it seems right now, is if you fear that you will be trapped by the light, you will be trapped by it. But if you don't, you have nothing to fear, and nothing can touch you in the astral. So that this is his vantage point. This is his perspective. This is what he thinks it's all about. It's all about you just ultimately believing in yourself. Pink Tourmaline, perhaps this whole idea of self-love and loving yourself just being the ultimate key. Maybe. I hope so. I hope that's it. But like I said, I have a little bit of an issue with the way that he's answering that question, because to me, it just seems too sweeping and too absolute and too dismissive, all these other accounts. Again, this is kind of like my
when you leave the body.
Oops. This is kind of my first reaction to, hold on, what's going on here? Did I get to the right clip? My first kind of reaction of the things that he's saying right now. Okay, and now in this next clip, he's talking about the reason why he believes there's nothing to fear once you pass on, once you leave your body. Also for astral projections as well. But in general, his main thesis of why we have absolutely nothing to be worried about.
There's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear at all.
Unless you believe there's something to fear.
Yes, pretty much. And the very word is, when I leave my body, should I protect myself? You're already weakening yourself by saying that. It would, for instance, let's go to a religious, an all-powerful God. Let's just say one singular Godhead, what people believe him to be so as. Do you feel that individual would be fearing things? Because the moment he stepped into fear, he would be powerful not. But
Indeed.
that all-powerful God is you and every single one of us. So when you say that, should I protect this out of my body? You've already weakened yourself to the very protection the very thing you're trying to protect yourself from.
My interpretation of what he's saying is it's all about the frame that you put around what's going to happen when you pass on. If you approach it with a frame of fear, then you will thereby from your own thoughts make yourself vulnerable. But if you approach it from the notion of, hey, I'm untouchable because we are pieces or fragments of God incarnate, then you will be untouchable. You will be as you feel. You will be as you believe. And there might be something to this. There might be some world where these two ideas exist together in unison, because there is a piece of it that connects back to the other idea. So, why is there this big effort to have all this manipulation to convince you that your dead ones or your spiritual guru is there to greet you and tell you it's okay and give you a life review and make you feel bad and make you feel good, and then ultimately what's all of this show for if we are truly powerless? Right? It actually does make sense that maybe ultimately the full power and authority is up to us, hence the manipulation needed to keep us continuing in this cycle, if this cycle exists. But of course, according to Darius J, Wright, I think what he's saying is he doesn't even believe such a trap exists, or maybe he believes it exists only if we believe it exists, if that makes sense, right? It could be one of these types of situations. Anyways, we got one more clip from Darius J. Wright where he answers this exact question. Somebody asked him this exact question at some sort of a speaking engagement. Are we in some sort of a reincarnation trap? And he essentially hits on this idea one more time. It's your belief. It's your belief. If you believe you are trapped, then you will be trapped. But if you don't, if you believe you are free, you will be free.
I've been witness to many people that have passed.
Yeah.
Died in a physical body. That's what I used to do. That's what I do. And for a long time, I believed that, you see the light, you see the people, they're here, they're waiting for you. And then the last few years, I've been learning, whether it's right or wrong, that that's actually a trap to bring us back. And that we should go to the no light, to know where, to the darkness. Does that sound or resonate?
Well, okay, so again, all right.
In case you guys couldn't hear that, let me say what she said. She basically said for a long time, she was like helping people who are passing on. And she would always say, okay, don't worry. You're going to see a light. You're going to see loved ones. They're all going to guide you to exactly where you're supposed to go. Just follow them. But then now she's learning about this idea of the reincarnation trap, that perhaps these are, as Jorjani believes, just projections that are false, that are just trying to convince you to re-enter the reincarnation cycle over and over. And it's just a big show that without any substance. And she's saying, I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong, but have you heard, does this resonate with you? That was her question. Now he's going to respond.
Speaking truth, nothing but truth here. Even that itself is not necessarily true, because once you understand what your soul is, you could go towards the light. You could go towards any trap, any negative thing in all of creation. It cannot touch you unless you believe it to be so. Yeah. So if you have the belief that you need to go towards the darkness, not towards the light, or you'll be reincarnated and blah blah, therefore you will. because your soul, is the ultimate authority on the other side, just like every other soul. And that's the truth. That's the truth.
There it is. So that, in a nutshell, is Darius J. Wright's perspective. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments too. What do you think of Darius J. Wright? Is this somebody that really resonates with you guys in general, or does it conflict with the way you guys feel about the paradigm and what's happening right now in this reality? I'd love to know your thoughts. I don't know yet. I'm still learning. I'm on the fence. I need to listen to a lot more of what he's saying. But like I already stated my objections, so take that for what it's worth. But ultimately, if what he's saying is true, it's beautiful. It's great. It's what I want to believe, that ultimately our destiny is in our own hands. And it's just a matter of belief and maybe escaping these negative thoughts, these negative ideas, that we're just, if we are truly imprisoned, it's by our own design. It's from our own mind, our own essence. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of what is going on when we pass on. What system are we in? Are we in a system? Are we truly trapped by these external forces? Or are we only trapped because we believe we're trapped? And therefore, once we believe we are free and embrace our own divine authority, then we will be liberated. I don't know, but I'm going to keep trying to find out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.